Claudia, this is Chats. What's the name of our podcast again? Chats.
That's from the outside, episode 4.
Episode. Oh, we're at episode 4. Well,
Yeah.
it's nice to be back. It's been interesting. We talked about, we just did our radio show and talked about, I drove up the Baja. I'm in Arizona. Everything's open here. There's hardly any masks. You do see some people that are going around wearing their mask, but we I haven't seen many. But the news, the what we were talking about before is the CDC new guidelines, which are very confusing.
hmm Yeah.
It,
Like the
it's
whole
like,
the whole pandemic has been very confusing because
yeah.
it's changed so rapidly. And what was the way to go all of a sudden 3 weeks later becomes not the way to go.
Well, and it's this fear of this Delta variant, whatever that is, and all of a sudden the vaccines that Joe Biden came out, what was it, last week, and said if you get vaccinated, you're not going to get COVID. I mean, he says this, and
It's
then
true.
the the CDC turns around and says, wait a minute, if you've been vaccinated, it doesn't matter. You need to wear a mask because you could still get COVID, or you can still transmit COVID. This Delta variant, whatever that is, and I really believe the CDC has lost a lot of their credibility. That just doesn't make sense. And Jen, I think her name's Jen Pataki, whoever the spokesman for Biden is, was asked by a reporter, so are you saying the vaccines don't work? And she didn't answer the question. But that's the question. So the vaccines don't work, but you get one. So I don't get it.
Well,
But
I think what is interesting is, and we've talked about this before, we are in fact the clinical trial for these vaccines. The vaccines were approved under an emergency situation, but this
right,
is what happens with clinical trials. It's like the scientists think they got it, and then they run the trial and they run the first group, and then they realize that no, and then they have to adjust it, and so we need to be aware of that these are in fact the clinical trials for these vaccines. And there was a very interesting explanation. It's like we are not being immunized, we are being inoculated.
hmm,
The vaccine does not make you immune to the virus. It inoculates you so that your immune system will react to the virus. And they're still trying to prove this is in fact the way it is.
well,
So
and it's interesting too because the natural immunity isn't even part of the conversation, which I don't understand. Natural immunity. I mean, I had COVID, so I it's kind of like, hey, if I get a vaccine, what's that going to do to me? I already have antibodies, and why isn't that more of a conversation? And why is it just being discarded? Like if you have natural immunity, why would you ever go out and get one? If you had the measles, you would never go get a measles vaccine. it's just not even it's just not even something you would do.
right,
And so
right.
it's just such an interesting thing that's happening that's not part of the conversation. But I did read something interesting. In Italy, they have a green pass,
Mhm.
and the green pass is to get into stores or wherever, which I think is, by the way, horrible. Welcome to Nazi Germany. But show your papers. But the one thing I will say about the Italian green pass is that they count, if you've recovered from COVID, that counts just as much as if you've had the vaccine, which is different than the French green pass, which they don't care whether you've had COVID or not. And so it just doesn't make sense, Claudia.
Well, we have politicians making health decisions, and they don't have the necessary background. And the thing is that the mainstream media is just covering part of the story, as
Right.
known all along.
Right.
And the fact that then people cannot make fully informed decisions. So I
Which
think
is which is against the laws, of the United States, is not to be able to make a fully informed decision, which butts up against people's these mandates that some of the companies are making right now, people are not fully informed of the risks, or that it's an experimental agent, or there's just a lot of things that are happening. And again, if you want to get the vaccine, you should go get it. If it's something that you
Oh,
feel good
absolutely.
about. And again, if you want to wear masks, you should do that. But there are some, you can't be telling other people what to do. That starts to come under authoritarian rule. And it's just one of the biggest dangers that I see happening right now. And it's just very interesting. But what I have hope about, Claudia, a lot of hope, is being in Arizona. People are kind of like, I don't know if I can say this on the air, but they're le vale madre of what the CDC is saying.
Well, the thing is,
And
people are getting tired,
yeah,
and it goes against human nature to to be socially distant, and to not be able to recognize each other, and to kind of like know half a person. I've caught myself having conversations where everybody's wearing a face mask, and I don't really know what's going on, because I don't know, wearing a face mask makes me hard of hearing.
yeah.
you know and then there's a lot of the innuendo that you miss. You've talked about this micro gestures, you miss it. You don't know if they're being
The micro
fake or
muscles.
not, if they, and because a lot of our conversations um, are not even verbal.
And
You get the intention through so many other signals that are transmitted through your face.
it's easy. It's easier to be mean when when you're behind a mask too. I mean, I've noticed people
Because
getting
they're anonymous.
it's much more aggressive. It's kind of like when people post things when they comment on a website, or on a
In
Facebook
social media,
page.
yeah.
It's
Mhm.
anonymous almost, and so they can just say whatever. They would never say that in person. And I think that these masks are also doing the same thing. People are more aggressive. They're more. I think it also makes people feel more aggressive, because it's frustrating. It's hot. It's just there's so many interesting things going on right now. And again, we're not saying whether to do something or not do something. It's about freedom of choice.
It's almost like we're part of a social experiment,
Hmm.
because I've seen it, and I've seen it in myself. When I'm in a situation where everybody's supposed to be wearing a face mask, and we're all wearing a face mask, and I don't think there's anybody that will say wearing a face mask is comfortable. I mean, I don't know anybody who would say that. But so we're all wearing them, and then all of a sudden you see somebody who's not, and I personally get angry. I'm like, why aren't you wearing one? We're all miserable over here. You should be miserable too. And then from a rational point of my head, of my being, I'm like, what are you doing? Just shut up. But the other part of me that is uncomfortable about being out in the heat wearing a face mask is like, no, if I'm miserable, I want everybody else to be miserable.
Hmm.
And it is such a bizarre thing that
Human
happens.
nature. It's
You
human
know?
nature. And if I'm getting the vaccine, everyone should have it, because I don't want to be the only one in the experiment. I'd like everyone else to be in it too. And I think that's
And
part
it
of it.
happens to all of us.
Although I have to tell you, if I'm in a group of people with masks on, first of all, I try to get out of groups of people with masks on as soon as possible. But if I am, and I see someone walk out without a mask, man, my mask is off right away.
Right, right, right. No,
It's like, woof.
yeah, it's
Okay,
like,
so
okay, so let's all pretend we're drinking something. But because
because COVID goes away when you have a drink in your hand. It doesn't
no,
even
it's
doesn't
all
even come
this,
to you.
it's all these rules that when you really truly analyze them make zero sense, because when you're sitting at a table, you don't have to wear a mask or what. Anyway, I won't go there. But it's just creating all these conducts that
Yeah,
normally wouldn't happen in our interactions with people. And
yeah.
it's just, I don't know, like I said before, that Chinese proverb that may you live in interesting times was actually
Mhm.
meant as a curse. And yeah, times.
Well, I hope that, and I believe this. I think a lot of people are waking up in a way spiritually that if without this pandemic would not have happened. And there's a lot of good that's coming from this. I believe, and I believe on the other side of this, Claudia, when things are looked back on, I just think we ran into a time when they talk about these fourth turnings. There's a book called The Fourth Turning, and it's about every fourth generation has this kind of event that happens, and there's upheaval, there's economic crisis, and I think the economic crisis is coming. By the way, I mean that's what in a big way.
Absolutely.
So,
So,
but we'll
but
see. We'll see.
you do believe that men, like mankind, is kind in nature, like their
I
true
do believe that.
nature is kindness.
I do believe that, and I do believe that we have been so kind that what happens by the fourth generation of it comes around to be so kind is we're forgiving things that we shouldn't forgive, like psychopaths and psychopathic behavior, and that's who becomes in charge. And I think there'll be a reaction to it. I think that it'll come back, and by the next generation, when they start taking control, then I think we'll have a period of peace. And just like has happened every 80-year cycle, 100-year cycle in the past thousands of years. And it's a very interesting way to look at it. One other thing before we wrap up our show, I think it's interesting. There was a YouTube that you and I were privy to, and it was this gentleman. Um, Sorry, I have a little allergy here. It was this gentleman that was talking about the CDC numbers, and I put them. Wow, I put them in the. He analyzed over four new data from 4.8 million hospitalizations from the CDC. 94.9%. Now, this is from the CDC own data
Mhm.
of COVID-19 patient had these common underlying health conditions that are largely preventable: high blood pressure, lipid imbalances, obesity, and anxiety. Now, I found that fascinating that anxiety was in there, but the fear that has been pumped into everybody over the last year and a half, it's criminal. It's criminal, the fear that's being pumped in. And for people that already have anxiety or other disorders, of course, they are freaking out more. 94.9% of the deaths that people that died had one or more of those four things on board. Now, why is nobody talking about why we should be treating high blood pressure, lipid imbalances, obesity, and anxiety? Why aren't we talking about how to treat those instead of causing more anxiety, more obesity by staying in a home, more high blood pressure, more lipid imbalances because you're so stressed?
Yeah.
Ugly.
But
Very ugly.
it's that thing that we've talked about as well, is the business of, it's not the business of being healthy, it's the business of keeping people sick, because that's where the business is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just unfortunate.
Who is this doctor? Did you see who the
And he's actually
it's called High Intensity Health
yeah.
is what his anyway, it's something to check out. If you check it out, you'll really like this latest video. And maybe we could even post the link on the
It will
on the show.
post it, and the paper is actually very interesting because it's from the CDC, and it refers to a study made on COVID patients from in 4.8 million COVID patients from March 2020 to March 2021 in the US.
Wow. Wow.
So,
Wow. Wow.
and the statistics, and that's why I love statistics, because they're just cold numbers. And I understand, I can completely understand if you've had a close person who was, who had COVID and who died, of course it becomes personal. And for you, that 0.004% is irrelevant. You just know that you missed somebody, you lost somebody that you love. I understand that. But when you are looking at the facts, and you turn them into numbers, you realize how out of, um, I don't even know what the word is. You know, the numbers don't match the reaction.
The reaction.
I'm
Yeah.
saying.
That's
Yeah.
that's I totally agree. There's a funny Mark Twain quote, and I do love when the statistics are presented in a way that that it seems to go along with the narrative. But what happens is people twist statistics around, and I think that's what the CDC has been doing a lot of. But there's Mark Twain, my fourth cousin, who we've talked about before. He said there are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics.
I disagree with Mark Twain though.
I know, I know.
Because statistics give you a clear,
They do, they do, they do. But sometimes statistics can be used
it
to
also depends what you're measuring, of course,
exactly.
because
You got
that's
to
you can cheat.
totally,
Yeah,
totally, totally.
absolutely.
Well, Claudia, I think this has been a nice little chat from the outside.
Absolutely. And look
So
forward to the next one.
we'll have the maybe when I'm coming down the Baja, we can chat.
Yeah,
I can
when
I
you're
can
by
do
a
some.
Bujem tree.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. We'll do
I
that.
think
But
there's no signal over there.
I don't think so either. So we'll do another show. I'm not coming back for 3 weeks, so we'll do another show next week. So
Absolutely. We will.
all right, all right.
Have a
Nice
good
seeing
one.
everybody. All
Bye.
right.